Welcome back to Neuroconversant Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication in the STEM workplace or any place that there is cognitive divergence, which is everywhere. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I love helping technical people make the transition into leadership. And today we have Lisa Richer. Lisa, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, we're happy to have you. And I would love to explain what you do, but I'm sure you can do it better than I can. So why don't you go ahead and tell everybody what it is that you do?
Absolutely. So I'm the founder of a neurodiversity consultancy, Journey to Bloom. I'm a neurodivergent success partner. And what that means is I truly believe that neurodiversity is the prism lighting the table. And through my 3C's journey map, I help bring people from stuck to success. And a lot of times that actually happens to be when I'm working with professionals, those technologists into leaders, because sometimes there's a lot missing in that middle. And I've lived through that living in the corporate world before I started my business.
Great. Just so we're all on the same page, can you define what neurodivergent means? Because you can ask 5 people and you can get 5 different answers.
Yeah. So my definition
Please.
is that it is a neurodivergent individual is a person who has a brain that diverges from the norm, the societal norm. So we are a society of neurodiverse individuals. Neurodiversity is an umbrella, and a neurodivergent person is someone who, like me, I have numerous neurodifferences, numerous diagnoses. And so I consider myself a neurodivergent individual.
Great. I often talk about someone who's just neurodifferent because I talk a lot about communication. And when you're talking to someone who's very different than yourself, it gets really hard. But the person doesn't have to be neurodivergent. If they're neurodifferent than you are, then it can be just as much of a challenge.
100%. In fact, I was talking to somebody the other day about, in some posts that I do say neurodifferences, but I still am calling myself a neurodivergent success partner. But because if I said I'm a neurodifferent, then it opens up a whole other can of worms. But absolutely, words matter, language matters. And I love that because we are all neurodifferent.
Yeah. And then just to round out the conversation, how do you delineate the difference between neurodiversity and cognitive diversity?
I don't think I've never been asked that question. In the simplest of form, it's almost the differentiating is a cognitive neurodivergence is it's forms around society. Your cultural different, like you said, how you were brought up. So the societal norms with how you were brought up, how somebody raised you could in turn become a cognitive difference or cognitive divergence without actually you being neurodivergent.
Perfect. So you explained to us what you do. And can you explain just a little bit more about how common neurodivergence is in the workplace and how people identify it? I guess, how often do people know? Because people are being diagnosed with things so much later in life that they don't find out they have ADHD until they're 40. So I'm curious of what you have seen.
Or almost 50, like me.
Yeah.
So it's very likely more common than we think. Even studies that I've looked at when I've been working to do some keynotes in the past had anywhere from 15 to 20% of a population to 30 to 40% of a population. So I'm not a researcher and I don't have an expertise specifically in diving into that. So it's a lot more than we think it is, I believe. In the workplace, it is very common and it's not uncommon for people to be like me who are undiagnosed and show up differently and communicate differently and are met with looks and verbiage that you don't really necessarily want to receive from someone because you are seen as different than what they were either taught to do or how they perceive something needing to get done. So I would say it's much more common. It's not everybody, it's not like one of two, but I would say it's much more common than one might think.
Yeah. My guess is about 1 in 5. And if you look at left-handedness, it depends on the region, what percent of people identify as left-handed, because so many people in certain cultures, it's seen as bad. And so they force themselves to be right-handed. And I think a lot of that happens with people who are neurodivergent is they learn to fit themselves into the way other people communicate. But it's just a lot of extra work. So you may not realize that someone on your team is neurodivergent and doing a lot of extra work to fit in with what's simple for everyone else.
And that was me. You just described me. What's interesting, what you just said, Jeremy, is left-handedness is considered neurodivergent. And my dad and one of my sons and my husband's dad are all lefties.
Wow. Interesting. We're a little off topic, but this is fun for me. I compare being neurodivergent in some way, like take ADHD to being left-handed. If you look at the dictionary definition of, say, ADHD, it's all about conditions and problems and issues. And I'm like, would you say that they have a left-handed condition? No, they're left-handed. So it's the same type of thing. Things are harder for left-handed people because the world's not made for them, but you don't view it as a sickness. So I think that kind of attitude needs to come towards neurodivergence as well.
Absolutely. The world was not built for someone like me. Yep. That's what it comes down to.
That's how I feel. So tell me more about how you help people in the workplace.
So there's several ways. One of them is working across parent resource groups or employee resource groups, helping to educate them on understanding neurodiversity, understanding neurotypes, leading and engaging across neurotypes. And at the core of all of it is understanding someone's learning preference, because whether you are diagnosed with a neurodivergent difference or not, understanding how people communicate is really critical. So it's one of those intersectionalities that I talk about a lot in my very first stages of any workshop, webinar, anything that I do with that. I also work a lot with individuals and helping them. It goes back to figuring out what you know, what you don't know, and you don't know about yourself, so that then you can in turn communicate effectively without feeling shame, guilt, defensiveness. Because if somebody doesn't understand you as you're advocating for yourself, helping others to have the clarity, confidence, and courage to share those things about themselves, to educate others, even if they don't understand it. So instead of allowing someone to say, you have to do it my way just because that makes sense to me, you're explaining and expressing, I need you to explain it in a different way because that doesn't help me get the job done. So instead of what happened with me over the course of time, where I would just literally shut down because I got so many people telling me just do it my way, but their way didn't make sense for my brain, I help others find their voice and figure out how to have those engaging collaborative conversations. And then I'll also do workshops or several day trainings or quarterly trainings in some cases with organizations that truly want to not only understand what neurodiversity is, but appropriately implement it and sustain it across long periods of time. And when I do those things, they wrap around leadership and how people work together, always the lens of neurodiversity, and always with those communication, the understanding of how people receive and share information best so that people can understand one another and move forward together in a collaborative manner.
I love that. And if you look at some very successful companies like SAP and JP Morgan, they have neurodivergent programs. They proactively seek out, I think it's JP Morgan that has a autism at work program. And they find that those teams are incredibly successful, but it's because they proactively incorporate them and get the most out of the strengths that those people have and don't worry as much about what is different or could be challenging. One thing that's interesting is what you talked about requires people to understand themselves, which very few of us do. The saying is, it's hard to read the label when you're inside the jar. We've been doing things and thinking the way we think for so long that it never occurs to us that the way we see the world is different from the way most people do. How do you help people understand themselves and help them understand how they best learn and communicate?
Yeah, great question. So when I'm working with people, I don't specifically state my frameworks that I work within, but for the sake of conversation today, I walk people through several stages, getting them to have clarity, confidence, and courage. In order to do what you are describing, the first thing I need to do is make them feel comfortable enough to recognize that vulnerability is strength and that it's okay to not be okay when you're in a conversation with me. So holding that safe space for someone to not feel judged, to not feel shut down, to not feel like when they're asking for clarity, someone's going to say you're being combative or defensive or too emotional or too this. All things that I heard throughout my corporate life. I worked a lot with technologists and data scientists and statisticians and PhD economists, and they were very good in their lane. And when you try to bring them outside of the lane, my brain runs sideways and theirs made of run linear. I was met, even when I'd come in to do work, I was met with this, like, those two opposing positive or negative magnets. It doesn't matter. Just they were not going together. And so helping people understand, using my lens of neurodiversity, I believe that neurodiversity is the prism lighting the table. And so those neurodifferences, whether you are deemed neurotypical or neurodivergent in society, all those neurodifferences, Jeremy, that you mentioned earlier, that all needs to come together. We need to unpack self-limiting beliefs. We need to unpack stories we're telling ourselves so that we can show up with curiosity and understanding that it's okay to not have all the answers. And then we gain the confidence to be able to sit in that messy middle and recognize that those unknowns are data points. They are not roadblocks. They're actually data points to getting you. They're not a threat to you. Those unknowns are actually supposed to be there to help you then work with others that are better than you in a certain arena. And that's part, to me, what takes someone from a manager to a true leader. Because a leader, and I call them thought partners, not even thought leader. Like they wrap their arms around you and they lift you up and then you lift them up. And it's this really balanced thing that's really uncomfortable for people. Because then to actually make this work holistically, you need to get to a place where you have the courage to live in that uncomfortable space and lean into those people that know more than you do in certain avenues. And that's the only way to truly move forward together. So when I'm working with people, if somebody hires me, whether it's an organization, an individual, a parent, I tell them, you are going to be the one paying me, but I'm working with you, not for you. If you want me to work for you, then we are not the right partnership. Because if we're not in partnership, this isn't going to work.
Nice. And can you remind me of what your 3 C's are?
Mm-hmm. Clarity,
Yep.
confidence, courage.
Got it.
So it's internal is one. So courage is internal. I'm sorry, clarity is internal.
Okay.
We're talking about. Confidence is relational.
Okay.
And courage is systemic.
Got it. I often say that being courageous or being brave isn't the lack of fear. It's having fear and facing it. If you didn't have the fear, you can't really be courageous or brave. You're just doing the thing that you're already comfortable with. So people look at being afraid of something as a weakness, but really, in my mind, when you have a fear and you're able to face it, that shows the most strength, more than not having a problem or not being afraid.
I like that. Yeah, that's interesting perspective. I really like that.
You're welcome to use it.
Thank you.
once people have gotten a better idea of what it takes for them to communicate well and or just be in the workplace effectively, how difficult is it for them to approach that with other people so that it's easier for them to fit in and work together?
I'm going to break this out. The approach of it, the more comfortably uncomfortable or uncomfortably comfortable you get in putting yourself out there, the easier it will be to approach it. And the more likely you will be not to feel like you have to fit in, instead that you get to stand out and move others through that process with you. That's the ultimate understanding of who you are and leads to that consistent confidence to have those, what I call the moose on the table, those really difficult conversations that we need to have, but people would rather put the elephant in the room and name it and tame it and then put it back under the rug. I want to be in that messy middle, because to me, the messy middle to me is where all the strategic greatness and magic happens. It's not at the top vision. It's not at the implementation. It is in that messy muck where we can be comfortable sharing our learning preferences with one another. We can be open to receiving that we do think and work differently. And we can come together in that beautiful colored prism and work through from stuck to success. And so my 3C's journey map combines with my Right by Ideas, now what I'm calling my pathway, I was calling my framework, that you're reflecting, implementing, lowercase I, small increments, practicing and evaluating. And so to get to the place where you can approach it, where you feel comfortable standing out and helping to create that change, that's when you know you've arrived.
That's fantastic. And to me, it's very similar to public speaking. People are so deathly afraid of public speaking, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you get. And I've seen people who would have to stutter through, not literally stutter, but stumble through a 1-minute talk. And then if they do it every week, eventually they get to the point where they're comfortable talking for 10 minutes in front of people. And it's that same thing. You face it, and the more you face it, the easier it gets.
Absolutely.
The other thing I've been noticing, I've been writing a lot of articles about how to communicate well in the workplace for people who are neurodivergent in one way or another. And in every case, the things that make it easier for those people to learn make it easier for everyone else in the room as well. The other people may not need it as much, but all of the methods to make sure that people with ADHD can work with you effectively, or dyslexia or whatever it is, all those same strategies are beneficial to everybody in the room.
I'm just writing a couple of notes here because this morning I was having a conversation with my son on the drive into school related to sharing about when something's misunderstood and understanding it. And in conversation with that, we were talking about how do you ask to advocate for yourself? And we were also talking about like whether you're in a meeting, I'm going to shift this over to a boardroom meeting because we're talking about that side of things right now. But just being prepared for that meeting makes a difference. So for example, I'm a pen to paper person. I'm taking notes because otherwise I'm going to interject. But I've also had people tell me, don't take notes because then you're not listening. But the reality of it is, if I'm not taking notes, I'm not listening and I'm interjecting, and then you're telling me to stop interrupting. So for me, I have to do these things. So you can't tell me to ping pong when neither one of those work for me. Like I need that. But then somebody else might need an agenda and have it like sitting there with everything to check it off and start to think about, how am I going to participate in this conversation? How am I going to get my thoughts together? I want to be a meaningful participant, but if I don't know anything about it before I walk in the door, I don't think I'm going to be prepared. And then another person may need to see it in slideshow format with visuals so that they can process it. And doesn't necessarily mean that you have ADHD or anxiety or autism or dyslexia. It just means that you need those things to most effectively be an active participant. And so when you're talking about communicating in the workplace and talking about what's easier for you makes it easier for everyone, everyone in the room might not benefit from that, but at least one person other than the one that spoke about it is likely going to get value out of it.
Absolutely. And to me, that's similar to just asking questions when you don't understand something. People are so afraid to ask questions and admit that they don't know a thing. I was in a meeting once and I didn't understand half of what the vendor was telling us. And I eventually leaned over to the person next to me who had been in the industry for 25 years. I said, "What does that mean?" He said, "I don't know." So I raised my hand and I asked the person presenting, I'm like, "What does that mean?" And there was an audible sigh in the room because everyone in the room was wondering what that meant, but no one was going to ask. He's like, "Oh, great. I'm glad you asked." And then he explained it. Everyone's like, "Ah, that's what it is." Asking whether it's for a thing or to understand a thing takes courage.
Absolutely. And I often say when I'm getting ready to run a session, I say the only ones that aren't good are the ones you don't ask. Because if you're thinking it, somebody else is too. So have the courage to ask me that question. I will ask you if I don't understand it, and then I will move forward. However, what you're describing, Jeremy, is in a perfect world. For the majority of my time in corporate, I wouldn't ask questions because the first 2 to 3 years, or at least the first year of each company I worked in, it became a stop asking so many questions. Don't you know the answer to that? How can you not know that? Aren't you smarter than that? Like every microaggression and combative and diminishing thought. And so I shut down.
Yep.
So in society, talking about systemic issues, some people are brought up that way, do as I say, not as I do. Others have had toxic bosses that have told them just only speak when you're spoken to, only share when I ask you to share, when I give you a position to share in. And so we've created an environment that becomes combative and defensive instead of engaging and collaborative. And that's part of the core with Journey to Bloom is meeting people where they are, unpacking what they know, what they don't know, what they don't know, they don't know. And it all starts with getting to know yourself and understanding how to communicate in a way that brings people together instead of pushing them apart.
Wonderful. Curious if are you normally dealing with individuals or whole organizations?
It's typically either an individual or a subset of an organization. I will tell you, I have tried and I've gotten to the front door and either somebody that was on board to support it left, was let go, funding went away, or somebody said they could do everything that I do. But if an organization wants me to help them, I'm happy to do it, but I will no longer beg, plead, or try to convince somebody that they need to change things in order to be more inclusive.
Got it. What brought me to that question was that if you're helping an individual, they may understand themselves better and they may know what to ask for, but then it may require working with their boss to make sure that they will actually be well received and get what they need.
Which is exactly why I would love to embrace departments and then other departments and then bring it all together chunk by chunk. You have a pilot, then you have the next group that comes on, the next group, and then the systemic struggles become systemic successes. But it costs money because I don't do it for free. And that's part of the problem too. We talk about implementing inclusivity, but we stop short of the implementation.
Yep, it's a problem. And you talk to companies and they're like, we want to do this. And then they don't really want to do it. It would be nice. It would be nice, but they're not going to do what it takes. So I'm about to start wrapping up. Are there any questions that I should have asked you that I didn't think of?
I wouldn't say there's any questions. We did talk about different types of learning preferences. So maybe if we just, for the audience, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it. I think we talked about this a little bit. There's the verbal, there's the written, there's kinesthetic, there's visual. There's 5 core ones that I typically talk through when I'm doing my sessions. I'm curious to know your perspective on how often you see that people share information differently than they receive it. Because I started asking that question in my trainings and in my education sessions, I would call them, because I'm trying to educate people so they can then do it themselves. It was pretty interesting. There's been a couple where some people would share information very differently than they received it. And other times it was exactly the same. And then there were some that said, well, I try to understand my audience to make it happen. So I'm curious to know what your experience has been with that.
It never occurred to me that someone would give information differently than the way they receive it, because most of us just assume others want what we want. So that's pretty interesting. I have not noticed that, but now I'm going to look for it.
I will say that it may be 50% of the time that when you share information but don't understand your team and how they learn and how they receive information, you're at a 50-50 shot that they're actually going to retain, they're going to process, retain, and or understand what it is you've shared with them.
Yeah, I totally buy that. The one thing we talked about, asking questions, and if you are with someone or with the team and you ask, does anybody have any questions? Like I said, most people are not going to admit that they have a question. What I learned from using AI is I tell AI, what are 3 questions you have in order to understand what I want better? And I don't do it exactly the same with people, but if you tell them, I need a question from you, they're guaranteed to have a question because there's something they weren't getting. So,
and I would typically say, because I've learned that too, people don't answer. Share one thing with me that you learned or something that you'd like to understand better.
Great.
And so I ask a statement that way, and then I will say, I'll take volunteers. And if no one volunteers, then I'm going to go ahead and toss my whatever I have with me for someone to answer that for me. So you're offering a safe space, and you're seeking their input, and you're asking them to share. You're not telling them they have to. You're telling them that they get the opportunity to. And the have to versus the get to is a big shift as well.
And I like what you just said. You reframed it from ask me a question to share your insight. And your insight might be, this thing doesn't make sense to me. But when you reframe it as share your insight rather than ask me a question, I really like that.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So now we do need to start wrapping up. Okay. If someone wanted to learn more about you and or reach out, how would they go about doing so?
My website, journey2bloom.com. My email address is the same, Lisa at the beginning of it. So Lisa at journey2bloom.com. And then I'm on mainly 3 socials, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Insta. LinkedIn and Facebook are my name. Insta is at journey2bloom.
That's 3's a lot. I struggle with 1 or 2 social medias. But
I do 1 post and I put them out to all 3. And that's another thing, when you're talking about communication, it is possible to reach audiences across all 3 without doing 3 separate posts. And I learned that when I tested it after spending tons of time trying to do all 3. I'm like, you know what, and I actually get more involvement now that I do 1 than I did when I was taking time to try to do 3 different ones. Because somebody told me to.
Yeah.
Somebody said to do all 3. So I tried it. It did not work for me. It took up too much time, and I also didn't get as much engagement.
Interesting. Yeah, I do articles and I post them on LinkedIn, and I also do an email newsletter, which includes the article, includes a podcast and a little bit more information. And then I'll post small clips on YouTube and link. I'm like, am I getting annoying by sharing this in so many places?
I say the same types of things. Yeah.
They're like, no, I only saw it this one place. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
There you go. So if there were one piece of communication advice that everyone could benefit from, what would it be?
If you're thinking it, someone else is too, when it comes to not understanding something, just ask.
I love it. All right, Lisa, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
Thanks for listening. If today's conversation resonated with you, share this episode with one person on your team who might benefit from it. And if you're leading a technical team and want to explore how these communication principles could work in your organization, visit www.neuroconversantleadership.com to learn more. And there you can reach out to schedule an appointment. I'd be happy to talk through what might be going on in your world. See you next week.